If you're serious about becoming a developer, then you need to start thinking like one. I've taught thousands of people how to code, starting as young as 9 years old and going all the way up to age 70. And throughout all of those age groups, I've seen the exact same mistakes, and they typically have to do with the way in which people think. Being a programmer is a lot different than many other fields, and the way in which you approach problems is so important, and it's often the thing that holds many people back from getting to that next level. So in this video, I'm going to break down those mistakes that I see over and over again and exactly how you can fix them so that you can advance and become a better developer. Now with that said, we first need to discuss what development actually is. What are you doing as a programmer? Well, the way you should think about everything is that you are ultimately a problem solver. Even though you're writing code and you're using different tech stacks or frameworks, at the end of the day, you should treat all of these things like tools. The ultimate goal is for you to solve some problem, to build something, to make someone's life easier or provide some functionality or value, and that's what you're doing as a developer. So always remember that at the end of the day, really your primary job is to solve problems. The programming languages help you get there, but you should treat everything that you learn like a tool that you'll eventually use and apply into some problem. If you can think like that, that's immediately going to help you get a step further, and that's going to really align with a lot of the other points I share in this video. Now look, I know that a lot of you watching this video are doing this purely to try to level up your skills to eventually land a developer role. Now I won't lie to you, this has changed quite a bit, especially in the era of AI, and that's why I've built an entire free guide with the sponsor of this video, HubSpot, that breaks down exactly how to land a developer role in the world of AI. Drawing on my over decade of experience, this summary covers the top programming languages to master and the most effective methods for learning them. It includes the best practices for creating your portfolio and resume, along with recommendations for YouTube channels and other resources to enhance your development skills. I've left a link to this in the description where you can access it completely for free. Now, my favorite part of this resource is the long list of YouTube channels and websites that offer great free ways to enhance your development skills. This content is focused on distinguishing yourself as a programmer in the AI era, offering essential insights and strategies to help you remain competitive in this industry. I'm thrilled to collaborate with HubSpot for this resource, enabling me to provide fantastic free resources like this to all of you. So let's dive into the first mistake that I notice all the time, especially with beginner programmers. Now, this is that they think about problems individually or on a case-by-case basis, not generally. Now, this kind of lends itself to algorithmic thinking, which we can talk about later, but the point is, most people try to solve one problem. That's what they're used to doing. So for example, in a math class, you're given a test that has maybe 10 problems on it, and you go through and you solve each problem. The approach that you use might just work for that particular problem, right? For example, I say something like 3x equals 9. Okay, you solve it and x equals 3. But in programming, the way you need to solve things is more general. You need to create a solution that works for every single possible case. And most people, when they start out, don't realize this. They try to solve problems like they did in their math class, where they come up with the answer to one particular case. Now, I can give you a concrete example of this. I know it's going to seem really simple, but trust me, this happens all the time. In a lot of my courses or when I teach people, one of the first things I get them to do is collect the user's name and then say hi to that user. So something like input, what is your name? They'd enter a name like Tim, and then it should print out, hello, Tim. But this should work for any name, right? It should work for John, it should work for Jill, it should work for Sarah. It doesn't matter what name it is, but what so many students end up doing is they actually hard code the name in. So they might do the input and get the user's name, but then they'll print hello and then whatever their name is. So no matter what happens, they're always printing out their name. Now I know this seems really, really basic, but this is a great example of what I'm talking about. People solve one problem. They think about how does this work for my name or my age or my situation or whatever case they're currently considering. They don't think beyond that to all of the different things that could happen, and it really leads them to creating solutions that only work in a very small subset of cases. So how do you fix this? When you're creating a solution, when you're writing code, you need to think how this applies to everything. How does this work in a really strange case? How does this work in a situation where you're not getting valid input? How does this work when you have negative numbers versus positive numbers? You need to broaden your horizon and imagine that anything could be passed to, for example, the function that you're writing, or that the solution that you're writing needs to work in any type of situation. I'm sure you've been on websites before where you enter some kind of input and it doesn't understand it. That's That's a great example of someone thinking about an individual case and not thinking about all the things that could potentially happen. So you really need to get good at the practice of considering what's known as edge cases, so random, weird, arbitrary inputs that could be passed into your program, and solving problems more generally. How do I make this work all the time, not just for this very specific case that I considered? If we talk about things like coding interviews, this is exactly what a lot of interviewers are looking for you to do. How do you look at the different inputs that they're giving you and consider what could potentially happen, ask clarifying questions, etc. So keep that in mind, and let's move on to the next point. So let's dive into the next major mistake. Now, this is kind of decomposing or breaking down problems. A lot of people fail to realize that a lot of the work you need to do as a programmer is actually coming up with the problems you need to solve. What I mean by that is oftentimes you're given some kind of task or you have something you want to complete, but that overall goal, that thing that you want to complete, is so huge and it's really overwhelming and difficult to even know where to start. In fact, the number one thing that I get from a lot of you in the comments is, hey Tim, I can follow along with your tutorials, but when I try to build something on my own, I don't really know where to start. I don't even know where to begin. Now that's because they're lacking in this specific area. So let's use an example here. Let's say I ask you to build a Twitter clone. That's a really overwhelming task. There's so many things you potentially need to do there, and if you just start trying to work on that immediately, you don't even know where to start. What are you going to do? Maybe you're going to pick a tech stack, maybe you're going to start trying to build some random features, but even me, if I just tried to build Twitter and that's the way that I think about it, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that. The first thing that you actually need to do, which is absolutely a skill you need to master, is be able to decompose that problem and break it down into as many sub-problems as you possibly can. So you hear Twitter, and then the first thing you should be thinking about in your mind is, okay, what are the major components that make up that application? What do I actually need to build? What are a few smaller steps that I can work on that's going to be easier to understand? So if you think about Twitter, maybe you're going to have a feed, you're going to have the ability to post, you're going to have a profile, you're going to need the ability for people to log in and to sign up, and you can start thinking about all these different features. But it doesn't stop there. Now you have a large feature like a feed. Okay, let's break that down even more into a ton of smaller subproblems. And you keep going until eventually you get to the point where you're solving individual functions or even, 10, 15 lines of code, small problems at a time. The way to be a really good developer is to know how to break something down into the smallest problems you possibly can and then tackle those one at a time. Now, this is a difficult task. I'm not going to say that this is easy. It takes a lot of practice, but you need to get good at this in order to actually create larger applications. Now, if you want some practical examples of exactly how to do this, I have a few videos on my channel where I do exactly that. I'll leave them on screen, and in those videos, you can see exactly how I decompose the problems. Now, the last major mistake that I know all of you have made before is failing to plan before you code. When you get to the stage of actually writing code, putting your hands on the keyboard, you should already know almost exactly what you're going to be doing. Now, obviously things change, there's some minor adjustments, maybe the initial idea you had doesn't work, but you should go into coding with a plan. Now, this is what all experienced developers do, and oftentimes I actually find myself on my iPad spending, hours trying to diagram out solutions, think about a particular problem, maybe taking a day off and going back to it before I even start writing any code at all. Now, this is something that took me a long time to develop, but it's so incredibly important that you plan out what you want to do before you just jump on the keyboard. The reason why a lot of people get really frustrated when they write code is that they go on the keyboard immediately, they don't plan anything, they don't even think about what they're going to do, and then they just start writing a ton of different code. They do 20 versions of this function, they fail a bunch of times, maybe eventually they get to the solution, but they're not really thinking. They're just kind of acting like a monkey or a robot, typing a bunch of stuff in the keyboard, trying it out, and just using trial and error constantly. Now, that is not the way to get good at development. That is going to take you a lot longer and be very, very frustrating. And instead, what you should do is the following. Start by breaking down the problem like I mentioned before. Remember that a programming language is simply a tool that you can use to solve the problem, but you need to know what the solution actually is. So spend some time, get a piece of paper out, use something like a drawing tablet, whatever way you like to plan your ideas, and start thinking critically about what you actually need to do to achieve the goal. So once you've broken the problem down, go to the smallest task where you're going to start and solve that particular task. Think to yourself, what tools do I need to use? Am I going to have a function for this? Am I going to have a class for this? What do I actually need to do to process this data or get my result? Try it with different inputs. Try it with different edge cases. Draw it out, visualize it, and once you're confident that you have a solution that works, now it's time to translate that solution into code. That's what all good developers do. They think first and they translate after. In fact, the coding should actually be the easy part, taking the solution that you've already come up with and turning it into code. Now, still, that will take some time. As I mentioned, you might tweak this, you might change it slightly, you might refactor it later on, but the point is you're starting from an idea and a potential solution and then turning that into code. If you do this, I guarantee you're going to get so much more done. It's going to be a lot more rewarding and less frustrating because you're going to have significantly less errors, and you're going to go to the computer with a detailed plan. You're going to know what you need to build, and you're going to find your coding efficiency goes up drastically. Now, those are the 3 major mistakes that I see almost all programmers make, especially when they're at the beginner or intermediate level. Question yourself, ask yourself, do you make these mistakes? How can you actively go about fixing them, and try to apply that to your next project? Let me know if you have any other mistakes or ways to think about programming in the comments down below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.